Should be good to go.
Yes, you're good to go. Recording.
Okay. We have with us Taimur Salim Jhagra. He is LBS MBA class of 2008, but that's probably his least impressive achievement. Other than that, Taimur post MBA went on to join McKinsey. He was there for around 10 years, eventually leading the public sector work in Pakistan as part of McKinsey. And after that, delved into the adventurous world of politics. He was a Minister of Finance as well as the Minister of Health for one of the provinces in Pakistan called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where he led some of the most transformational initiatives that we've seen in Pakistani politics, including the Sehat card as well as pension reforms, which, if you know anything about the Pakistani politics, is one of the burning issues that's spoken about. But I think he has a lot more adventurous introduction that he's going to do himself in the presentation. And so, yeah, welcome everyone.
Thank you. Lex is here. So, good afternoon to everyone, and we discussed this yesterday and agreed, maybe because they think I'm an ex-McKinsey consultant, that I should start off by giving a short talk, and an ex-McKinsey consultant will always give a talk with slides. But I've tried to make the slides not as drab and boring as they always are, and I just try to be brief so that we can then just talk about anything that you like. I was also told to give a little bit of introduction about my background. So indeed, I was here. This is my graduation day. I graduated in 2008. I don't know why this picture is dark. That's my daughter with me who was born here. She's sitting at the back, and she's going to Berkeley now. So 2008 is a while ago. It was a different time, like you guys. I was looking for jobs and getting rejected by interviews and hoping to somehow get into a good career to pay off my MBA debt. But indeed, I've been through 3 or 4 changes or interesting phases through my life. I originally was a mechanical engineer and then went into the oil and gas business and started off being very hands-on. So I spent 6 years at Schlumberger, which is the largest oil service company in the world. And I used to test for oil and gas wells. And I did some of that work in Pakistan. Then I went to China. That picture is from China, if you just go back. Yeah. That's in 2003. Then I led the Schlumberger's training program for the Middle East and Asia. And then I just got bored. And so if any of you get bored with your careers from time to time, just to know that I think that this tends to happen to many of us. I got bored, and one day I decided that I just couldn't be in this one place anymore, so came to the MBA. Post-MBA, of course, I was fortunate enough to get into McKinsey and almost spent a decade. This picture is when I got elected partner. It's my official portrait. I was the first person elected partner on purely a development sector platform. I was part of the Dubai office and worked through the Middle East to begin with, as most strategy consultants do across industries, with a lot of work, as you can imagine, on energy. In fact, I remember we were doing a project on the civil nuclear program of one of the GCC countries. I still won't name them. That's how we were trained. And while at Schlumberger, I had also been trained in how to handle explosives that go under the earth when you're drilling for new wells and you're perforating new wells. And I remember that in the middle of this study, I was actually going for my first trip to the States, and I was actually very nervous. I thought, Pakistani passport, knowledge of explosives, knowledge of nuclear energy. I don't know whether they're going to let me out of the airport or whether they're going to send me to Guantanamo Bay. I did have a 3-hour interrogation. They didn't bring any of this up, but I got out and I went out into the US and have been there a number of times since then, which was 2010. Anyway, once I became partner at McKinsey, and that was about 9 years in. I became partner after 8 years. I spent a year as partner. I started to get bored in my career again, and the 2018 elections were coming up in Pakistan. I have a little bit of a family background in politics, but I, like many expatriates, and like many of you may feel, although if there's people who feel otherwise, I actually feel it's nothing to be apologetic about. My entire professional career, the one thing I wanted to do was to give back to my country and in some form of public service. Because I felt that coming from a place like Pakistan, the intelligentsia or those with the capacity to actually do something tend to talk about the problems we have rather than act. And this talk, no action culture typically results, in my opinion, in the sort of inertia that we have in a place like Pakistan. So I thought I was going to go and change that. I joined Imran Khan. Imran Khan won the 2018 election. I became Minister for Finance in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. I was Minister for Finance for the entire 5-year term. And over the last 3 years, I also held the health portfolio. Now, if you guys think handling the finances of a 40 million strong province in a country like Pakistan, where we always have a challenge of money, is difficult, you ain't ever seen the health ministry. Because from the day that I took on the health ministry, I spent 95% of my time on health because of the lack of maturity in our systems. A lot of change is driven by individuals, and there is huge resistance to change. Interestingly, this political career, as I said, I've chosen these pictures because I was looking through this morning, and the contrast, of course, I just talked about my ministry, but I still came in to office in a relatively crisp shalwar kameez, our national dress, and a waistcoat. But when you were out amongst the masses, and when I was out touring the province, you had to be very different. Each of these, the 3 pictures on the right are all when I've been given honorary turbans touring different parts of the province. And each of those turbans is local to a different part of Pakhtunkhwa. The one on the left, where I'm in the Yasser Arafat-esque, is when we were out on one of our many protests since Imran Khan was deposed. We believe through a vote of no confidence that was more contrived than actually warranted. And Imran Khan at the time warned about the lack of political stability that this would bring. Pakistan has been unstable for the last 2.5 years since this has come. This headgear is basically because it was 45 degrees. And as you can see, I don't have a lot of hair on my head. So it was worth it. So anyway, so there was a story over here of shifting. But I can tell you one thing. Even though I made less in 5 years than I did in the month before that, and then I did in the month after that, when I've actually joined a little bit of work, I can tell you that nothing has been more fulfilling than public service. Because what is true, and if you do have a passion in some way to contribute, it doesn't have to be immediately after business school or your degree. I personally believe you'll find your way, but I can tell you that the most fulfilling periods of my life that I've had are feeling that I'm helping to change either things for millions of people or helping bring about the sort of institutional change that we need in a place like Pakistan. Now, the journey hasn't been easy because when the 5 years finished and we had this crackdown on PTI after a day of protests, I had to, like almost everyone else in the party, go underground for a year, literally not able to show my face. One of my colleagues was with me for much of the time. So the two of us saw each other's faces, but we were hiding in one place, in the other, we threw our SIMs out. And interestingly, I think, compared to when this has happened in the past in other places, the one thing that we did have access to is social media. And some of us actually use that. So if any of you have been interested in politics in Pakistan, you may have seen me vlogging from my account through this time period. But again, I can tell you that even though that 1 year or almost 1 year before the election, where we literally couldn't get out of hiding, and I'm not going to say where I was, God knows what happens in Pakistan and when you may need those places again. But it was again, perhaps the most stern learning experience I've had in terms of test of character. Because many of us heard many things. I've still got charges of murder, attempted murder, and terrorism on me. One day, I went, along with a group of other people from Peshawar, who were all former MPs, were the first people to decide to apply for bail because we felt that the Peshawar High Court at the time was actually against the grain, taking a stand on ensuring that the law is followed. We got bail. Despite getting bail, I had these random police attacks, I would call it, on my house with my family there. That would happen. But when you would ask the local police station, they would say, we don't know who did this. It all went into election. And as happens traditionally in Pakistan, we assumed, we didn't assume, but the political manipulation that happens in Pakistan and those that do it assume that Imran Khan's and PTI's vote after about 2 years of crackdown would be cracked. Now, once we got bail and some of us were able to go out a little bit into our constituencies, into being able to engage the masses, we could see that the situation on the ground was very different. And so we went into election very confident that in some way or the other, democracy would ensure that we get representation in a way that Pakistan could go back to normalcy. And I'll get to that point about how democracy, normalcy, and economic change are all interrelated, in my opinion. But to show you guys, and we have some people in the room who are not from Pakistan, some from Pakistan. If you follow the politics of Pakistan, you may have seen something like this. But here's a small case study of the seat that I contested in 2018 and won by a record margin from a place called Hayatabad in Peshawar, and a seat that I won in 2023, or at least should have won. If you go to the next slide, I'll come back to this. Yeah. This was my actual result. And we know this because we know, and almost all parties agree, that the 2024 elections in Pakistan on election day are largely fair. And we know that because all of us got official results from every polling station signed by the presiding officers. So we have an exact record of what happened on our seats. And then, being an ex-McKinsey consultant, I, of course, not only scarred that record, but have converted it into graphs and all of that. So there's about 38,000 votes polled. I got 63% of the vote. And I thought by night when the last results were coming in, very happy because it was very clear that, in fact, it ended up that if you actually look at this result, I had the largest majority in the entire province. But now let's show you some magic of what actually happened. So the result that was notified, if you go back, look what happens to this 25,000 number. It goes to 11,496. And look who won. If you go back, the poor chap who won, whose name I'd never heard, actually got 1619 votes. In Pakistan, when you get less than 5% of the votes, you actually get your deposit that you have to pay for the election forfeit. He's sitting in the assembly. I'm talking to you guys, which is not so bad because London is not such a bad. But this has happened on hundreds of seats in Pakistan. There was a third-party audit released yesterday on one of the seats in Lahore, on which one of the most famous lawyers from Pakistan contested, where 100,000 plus votes were added to his opponent to make him win, and they're not in the vote count. The exact same story happened with our former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif against one of our stalwarts, a doctor called Dr. Yasmin Rashid, who co-led the work on the health insurance with me. And she's sitting in jail. And the way that the sort of techniques used for the rigging were very interesting, because unlike traditional elections, I've seen a number of elections in Pakistan where you see a lot of rigging. It typically happens at the polling station where you have to force and stuff ballots. And this was simply someone who's got the authority to change numbers on a result, going and changing numbers on a result. Don't believe me? If we go to the next slide, and the next slide. So this is the record that I have. This is one of the polling stations. It's polling station 2. For those who can't read Urdu, serial number 4 is my name. Coincidentally, the person they made win was serial number 5. So you can see I got 312 votes, and this gentleman got 46 votes. Here, the 312 has been changed to 120, and the 46 has been changed to 238. Now look at this. Can you see the Tipex used there? Can you see it here? You think this is just a loser whining about sour grapes? Let's look at another example. I got 248. The guy got 0. So I'm happy. Instead, 100, 140. Can you see the overwriting here? Where did I get these from? These are official results uploaded on the Election Commission website. Next. 735 and 2. I thought I was popular, but somehow the 735 changes into 300. The 2 changes to 437. Can you see the overwriting again? Look at it again. Next one. 568.21. You almost can't make out whether he's given me 1160 votes, but because my votes are always being reduced, I thought I can't have 1160, I have 160, and the other guy has 429. Now, there are 3 or 4 different models of rigging used here. My returning officer thought he was being very smart, because if you look at each of these 4 or 5 results, and on almost all except one of the polling stations, you add these 2 numbers up, 568 and 21, 589, and you add these 2 numbers up, still 589. He's redistributed the vote so that the turnout doesn't change. More examples, 292.10 becomes 92.12. Again, you can see it's hard to change a 2 into a 0, so he's had to rub it off and then cross it off. And so you have this. Here's the 212. Turning 10 into a 212 is easy because there's just not many votes. Next. Another one, 398.27. Again, this is almost a work of art in the level of overwriting that you have to do. And interestingly, for me, this happened on 64 out of 66 polling station results. My leads were so big that he had to change every result. And by the way, one thing that a TV anchor pointed out to me, like he's given you minus 33 votes. I don't think anyone's ever got minus 33 votes ever. I hold that distinction in history as the only politician to officially get negative votes on a polling station. Now, I want to show you something else. Forget this one. The next slide, and then this is a shark. This is me. And if you go back and you go back, I'll tell you why. While this guy thought he was being smart, look at what happens to my vote bank on each polling station. 312 becomes 120, last digit, 0. 248 becomes 100, last digit, 0. 735 becomes 300, last digit, 0. You start to see the pattern. Because the guy was trying to redistribute the votes, he was subconsciously failing. What I found later on is one of the electoral tests for rigging called the zero-digit test. If you get a number of results that are random, in this case, the last digit should be random, 66 results should be equally distributed as far as the last digit's concerned. So you should have 6 to 7 zeros, 6 to 7 ones, 6 to 7 twos. We're talking to a bunch of MBAs, even though my math may have become weaker in 15 years. And indeed, it was like that. And by the way, if you look at this last digit test for the 2020 US presidential elections or the 2016 elections, it works perfectly because it's such a large sample. And you look at individual polling station results. If you go forward, I also had just 7 zeros. But once the polling presiding officer was done, I had 27 results ending in zeros. 40% of my results were ending in zeros because the guy was adding. And there's a kid called Osama Khalid, who I randomly found out, who wrote a paper on this, saying that here's an example of rigging in Pakistan. It's failing the zero-digit test. And he worked out the probability. And he said it would have been more likely for Jagra to be eaten by a shark while he was struck by lightning than to have 40% of his results ending in zeros in an actual election. I trust him. I trust him also because it suits me, but you can see that this can't be the case. He worked out the probability to saying that because I live in Peshawar, which is 2,000 kilometers from the sea, for me to go to Karachi, be eaten by a shark, and then be struck by lightning at the same time was a 1 in 57 billion probability. But this was lower than the probability of this set of election results, which was 1 in a trillion. So 1 in 1,000 billion. In consolation, if we just go back, I can say that before I was eaten by a shark while being struck by lightning, I did manage to do some good things. And I think that's the sort of reform that we need. And that's what actually makes a career in public service worthwhile. If we go back to the set card slide. Right. I think the important thing that politicians can do if we want to transform the countries that we live in is to be bold in ambition and to be able to lead in execution. And I think the greatest example of that, and I'm happy to claim a small part in it, is Imran Khan's effort to revolutionize healthcare in Pakistan by trying to roll out universal health insurance. We couldn't do it across the entire country because we didn't have a government in Sindh. But between Pakhtunkhwa, Punjab, the federal capital, Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, which are 2 provinces and 3 regions, over 170 million people were given this insurance. And what it provides is inpatient and emergency cover to everyone. You all live here, so you know that whether it works well or not, if you get sick, you can use the NHS. I've used it when I was here. In a place like Pakistan, all critical shocks are typically covered with out-of-pocket expenses. So you could immediately see that this was transformational. I think there's a very similar program in India, anyone from India, which covers the bottom 40%, PMJ. We covered everyone. And the reason we could cover everyone is, one, we realized that it actually, in absolute terms, doesn't cost that much. Calculated when I made the case for this, to give everyone health insurance cost $2 a head a year in Pakistan. I'm sure the numbers are comparable in India because you spread it over such a large number of people and the absolute cost of healthcare is still quite low. The advantage of giving it to everyone meant that we took out a lot of rent seeking in terms of person selection. In fact, the way that the idea of giving it to everyone came about was, I was not yet the health minister, but the health minister and department had come and were asking for 15 billion rupees to do a survey to screen out undeserving beneficiaries of the 20% of the population that got an earlier version of this program. And I looked at the numbers, and so your MBA skills will come to some help sometime. And I'm like, we spend 3 billion a year, and we want to spend 15 billion a year to do a survey to take out those that aren't deserving. It doesn't make sense. In the additional 15 billion, we can actually give it to the entire population, and it's just an additional 10 to 15% of my health budget. And I need to be spending 2x what I do in health to actually make health as a proportion of GDP spending equivalent to the comparator countries that I strive to meet. It was a no-brainer. And in 2 years, we had, ever since it was made universal, we had 6 million people between Pakhtunkhwa and Punjab use the health insurance. And the impact was incredible. It was unfortunately discontinued in a way after we left, but you could actually see that this was a program that a set of civil servants couldn't have come up with in this sort of ambition. I was quite popular for this. I was not popular for the next set of reforms that I did, which, if you change the page, is to try and do something about our pension bill. Pakistan is one of the only countries in the world that has, for public sector employees, almost completely unfunded pensions. So the taxpayer pays for everyone's pension. That means that our pension bill is growing at about 25% a year. And over the last 10 years has gone from about 2% of national spending to over 10% of national spending. It's crossed 2 trillion rupees this year. We calculated that if it doubles in less than 4 years, it will be more than 10 trillion rupees in less than 10 years. So we had to do something. So obviously, having been schooled here and being gone to McKinsey, decided to put at least all our new employees on a funded contributory pension program, and did this in the 5th year of government. I was obviously not very popular with government employees, but what I predicted was that it wouldn't cost me votes because they're still 5% of the labor. It did cost me votes, or at least whoever made me lose, I hadn't touched their pension, but anyway, I guess those things happen in life. So you can actually see the increases in pension. But to be able to do this, why this gives me pride was, this was obviously not even popular with my political colleagues. But not only did we do this in 2022, all the other governments in Pakistan have now replicated it and copied it. They don't give me credit, which I'm also not too upset about because I don't like reminding my voters. this. But anyway, you cannot do these things sitting as a McKinsey partner. You cannot do these things sitting as an LBS professor. You have to be able to get your hands dirty in public service if you want to make this change. And so now if we get to, again, just keep going forward. Yeah. Now if we get to the question that I was asked, and we can talk about any of this as we get into the Q&A, is our economy likely to improve if we have the current political situation in Pakistan? For those that are Pakistani and for those that aren't, I think if I'm to try and summarize in a nutshell the dual challenges that our economy faces, one, we have a fiscal framework. That means that we have to basically borrow almost everything that we need to spend because the revenue we generate effectively goes into debt servicing. And so we need a different fiscal framework. And two, because an economy that has still not developed competitiveness, because I feel over the 30 or so years that I've followed what's happening in the Pakistan economy, we're still confused whether we want to be an open market economy or whether we want to be socialist. And because of this confusion that we're in, we still basically export around $30 billion, and that's way less than the very basic level of imports that we need, and hence means that we perennially in a foreign exchange crisis, in particular when we open the taps for growth, which tends to be consumption-led, and therefore tends to rely more on imports without exports going up. And fixing that, in a way, fundamentally requires structural changes to the economy if you actually have to act on some of the levers that will transform that equation. Like a good consultant, I've broken that down. You go to the next slide. Right, so you can increase tax revenue. It's not popular, and you have to do it. Tax to GDP in Pakistan is 9%. You can reform pay. I'm a big proponent of that, public sector pay, because we have something like 5 million public servants. And if you actually look at the productivity of public sector officials, I think it's fair to say that no more than 2 or 3 actually work. And I don't think it's a question that's asked enough in countries like ours to say, why are we paying their salary? Right? You can reform pensions. I've started that particular journey. You can impact things like procurement. You have to fix the size of government. It's very interesting. I told you that I earned more in 1 month. Sorry, I earned more in 1 day in my last day at McKinsey than I did through an entire month of my public sector pay, which was 200,000 rupees at today's exchange rate, just over $600 US. So I was earning $600 a month, but as a minister, I had about 20 staff revolving around my office. From the tea boy, the kid who opened the door, my personal assistant, my junior personal assistant, the driver that I was available to me on duty. And one day I did tell the chief minister, look, we don't need this. I even make my coffee myself, right? And think of a world where if we're not paying 20 people to surround the one person who does work, everyone can get paid better, and the extra money can be pumped into the economy to actually create more jobs. So we do need to fix the size of government. We need to win the war for talent. Instead, what government tends to do is to try and cut operational spending, as if we spend a lot on schools and hospitals anyway. We don't. Similarly, if you look at the even more complex problem of increasing reserves, you either need more investment or you need greater exports. Now you tell me, who's going to invest in a country which decides every 2 or 3 years to blow up politically? And that's our challenge. So that is a longer term fix in terms of what we need to do. But this is what we need to do. And therefore, if you think of exports and investment both being linked to the confidence of investors to come in and invest in your country, it just points towards one thing: political stability and continuity of a system. And that's the one thing that we've had lacking in Pakistan. And through my year in hiding, it was very clear to me, because I had a lot of time to think, that we need to enable the conditions for that if we are to crack out of this low productivity, low growth perennial cycle that we've got. Right? We can't assume, because to me this picture depicts very well the sort of equilibrium that we have in Pakistan. This is not equilibrium. This is not balance. This is a state of unequilibrium. We can't assume in a state like this, where a government in Pakistan knows that it's sitting on a powder keg, because it knows that on hundreds of seats, what has happened is what's happened on my seat. And even though we have imperfect institutions, we still have institutions that don't just toe the line. And so that is always looking over their shoulder to see, will Taimur Jagra's election result be overturned? Will one of the hundreds of other election results be overturned? And if the government can't be confident about the very foundation that it's standing on, its ability to take the difficult decisions to actually transform an economy, I think are next to zero. And that's the challenge that we see in Pakistan. I just end with a question that I'm often asked, so that we can discuss this further. Many people ask me, ever since I've emerged out of hiding, I'll say it in Urdu for those of you who, ab maza aaya? Right? And to translate that, it's basically an expression which says, satisfied with wanting to leave being a partner at McKinsey and going back home and trying to do something. And my response always is, I don't think that if I just step back and actually reflect on it even for a millisecond, what it actually proves is that people like me and people like some of you who want to go back to their country and contribute, make the wrong decision when they do that. Because I think we need more of a critical mass of change agents to be able to push back and actually do stuff that creates irreversible reform. The journey isn't easy. That's clear. It's particularly clear in this last year that I've spent. But it is fascinating. And even though there may be periods such as mine where, and that such as Imran Khan's, that such as many of ours in the party, where we're facing everything from murder to terrorism to accusations of being anti-state, to the fact that I think at the moments that you have actual impact that's transformational, it makes all the risk that you take worth it. So proceed with caution if you have such a career with mine, but know that even though there's likely to be pitfalls, that at least part of the journey is also likely to be fulfilling. Thank you.
No, it's
Oh,
perfectly fine.
absolutely.
So the idea here is that we'll open the floor to questions and actually spend a lot more time taking questions from yourselves, and we also have some questions for Taimur to really bring this like whatever you want to ask related to current political system. I know a lot of Pakistanis have questions related to what's happening in the country right now, and Taimur can tell us a thing or two.
And of course, not Pakistan questions.
Yes,
We can also
please.
talk about like his LPS journey and experience. Like, I mean, we've got people here who's starting their first day at LPS on Monday. And
Oh,
so it's
fantastic.
like, full circle, 18 years,
Who's
what you
starting?
went through. So so it'd be lovely to, if you were to do it again, or what would you change?
Should I start with that?
Yeah.
I wouldn't change much. I think, by the way, LBS is a fantastic school in the sense that I don't think you could be in a more vibrant city in the entire world. And I would just say, enjoy it to the maximum. I think different people come to an MBA with very different objectives and from very different backgrounds. And so there'll be people who will spend the entirety of their MBA actually absorbing much of the education, and there'll be people who actually spend very little time paying attention in class. But all around the education experience, and it's been a while, whether it's the study groups, whether it's the sum of the people who come on campus, whether it's the network that you make, it's a fantastic journey. And I can certainly say it beats being in the middle of the forest somewhere in France and somewhere in the boonies in some small town in America. So yeah. So I think you've come to the right place. And the 2 years I spent here were two of the most memorable that I've had. And in some way, the highs and lows of politics makes them even more memorable.
So my next question is going to be a follow-up to similar LBS journey of yours. You graduated in 2008, which is just before the financial crisis hit. How was the early career days in McKinsey? Were you impacted by it? Do you remember? Were you scared for yourself? Were you benched? Because these are the kind of thoughts most of us are having as we're going through our LBS journey and MBA journey right now.
Yeah. So I think you just back yourself. And I think there is some fear and frustration if you suddenly get in a recession. And in fact, the 2 years that we were here, to begin with, were some of the most feel-good years that we had, 2006, 7, 8. We had a bit of the beginnings of a credit crunch. I think it was in 2007 that was somewhat local, but and I was lucky enough to get my job relatively early in the second year with McKinsey. So in the beginning, I felt pretty insulated. I can tell you before that, as I was actually applying for interviews, and everyone who comes to a place like LBS is a high achiever, I think the one thing you should be prepared for is that the job market competition gets a lot more cutthroat. And I do remember for the first time in my life going to interview after interview, and this is before the recession. And I never experienced the feeling of rejection before, not in this way. And so through the internship round, all the consultancies saying no. Many of the corporate players saying no. Even companies, I think I got interviewed for BP and they ended up not taking me. You start to feel a little bit down and you do have to pep yourself up. I worked at Tropicana through my internship year. And then when the job market year began, I was sort of prepared for this phase of rejections to open again. And again, I had a McKinsey interview, and I didn't think it went well at all. McKinsey still has 2 rounds of interviews, right? So I had my first round interviews, and I forgot about it. Because I thought they dinged me, and they hadn't written to me. And I remember we were playing a cricket match here at Regent's Park, and actually an Indian friend of mine who was an associate partner at McKinsey asked me about my interview. And I said, I flunked because, and he's like, what, did they give you any feedback? Because McKinsey gives feedback on the interview. I said, no, they haven't contacted me. He said, you should just check. So when I checked, the recruiter said, oh, we missed you. you have qualified for the next round. And I didn't know whether to be angry or happy because, you know, I was getting revivals of this feeling of rejection all over again. What is interesting is the moment I got my McKinsey acceptance, something happened in my mind. And this tells you what little triggers can actually transform the way that you approach things like interviews. Suddenly my confidence levels shot up and I was acing interview after interview. I got into McKinsey, I got into BCG, I got into Bain. And when I got into all three, I thought, I'm not going to be like the people who keep 5 job offers in their pocket. And I was hating them because I wasn't getting a single internship and had to do my internship at Reading at Tropicana. So I just said I'll go to McKinsey and that was it. And so I think it's memories like that or learnings and experiences like that that make it worthwhile. Because these struggles, I literally remember walking past Hyde Park Corner after learning of the latest rejection and just trying to perk myself up, trying to go back home. And it changed immediately after one piece of feedback with the same interview that honestly hadn't gone any better than my first round McKinsey interview for internship. Once they told me I was in, I think my body language must have been different in the rest. See, I'm serious. Something had to have changed because everyone was taking me, and it was the same brown guy from Pakistan with little to no hair on his head, wearing the same suit, the same tie. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't anything extraordinary, and everything was suddenly different. So I think that's one learning to take. Be prepared for tough competition, but don't let it get you down. And I think the other learning is, as you said, going into recession, certainly getting into McKinsey, I had decided to start a bit late. I decided to start with them. In fact, I remember I started November 4th or November 8th. And because I thought I had a job offer, so I want to enjoy it. And in September, Lehman collapsed.
Yeah.
And suddenly I thought, if I don't hold on to my job, who's going to pay all this debt? Because if I go back to Pakistan as well as I do, right, earning in rupees and paying a 50,000 pound loan, having spent your entire savings on an MBA is not going to be easy. The other funny part was going to Dubai, and I'd been in Dubai before with Schlumberger, and we had a really nice 3-bed villa, we had a really nice car. I went to McKinsey after 2 years of LBS. And Dubai was at the height of its bubble. And from a 3-bed house in Springs, if anyone knows their way around Dubai, I went back, and for the same house rent, I couldn't afford a 1-bed place in somewhere in the boonies in Dubai called International City. And I had to, my wife was with me, and we had to spend 8 or 9 months basically just flipping around hotels. And because we could see that the property market was crashing and we didn't want to be tied into a contract, right? But it worked out. I think what was important to believe through that first year at McKinsey was not to do the job out of fear of being let go. Because in an up or out culture, which many of the jobs that you'll get into on the other side of LBS, the moment you start thinking negatively, I think you go back to this job interview process that I talked about, you are going to create yourself or put yourself in a mental situation where you actually increase your chances of failure. So I almost trained my mind to believe, so what if they let me go? I'm just going to work, do what I need to do. And then that helped me pick up on a third lesson that I've sort of held on through my career, which is to follow your passion. Because once I made it through that difficult stage at McKinsey, This desire to want to contribute back to Pakistan made me want to work in the public sector. It made me want to work in Pakistan. And every partner that I talked to said, don't do that because it's the perfect way out of the firm and you have partner potential. You don't want to be a private equity guy. You don't want to be an investment banker. You should tactically focus on the energy sector. And I thought about it. And I thought that working in a culture such as McKinsey's, where you're working 14, 16-hour days, you're giving too much to your work if you're not enjoying your work. So I decided that I was going to go into doing public sector work, doing development work. I did a bunch of development work, then not just in Pakistan, but across the GCC. I did a bit of work with a Turkish team in Azerbaijan. I did some work in Africa. And I can tell you that when I actually went into public life, the experience of having worked with governments and seen how governments work across the world, I think gave me a lens without which I wouldn't have been able to do some of what we've achieved. So I think the lesson there just is, yeah, recessions will come and go. If you're good enough to get into LBS, you're not going to die of hunger. So it's fine, right? Do what you want to do, and ballpark, you'll be successful.
Yeah, I guess we should shift our gears to the theme at hand. We're very happy to take questions from the audience to start off, or we can start off if anyone has burning questions. That's
I think
if you can just introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, so that we can just.
my name is Sadar. I was born in Pakistan, but immigrated to Australia with my parents when I was 3. But my parents always made sure to take us back to Pakistan for vacations and ensure that we were closely engaged with the culture. And my parents are both, well, my dad in particular is a stalwart supporter of Imran Khan. And, I've independently read about his life story, how he went to Oxford after graduating from Etchison and spent time both in the West and in Pakistan. And like yourself, gave up a lot of opportunities that life in the West had opened up for him to devote himself to being in Pakistan and trying to change this seemingly perpetual cycle of one corrupt, self-enriching government after another. And so, yeah, I wanted to say that, it's really inspirational to hear about how you gave up a lot to go back to Pakistan. And how, one of the themes that you touched on was how people like us who are able to acquire skills and knowledge that they can channel towards trying to make a difference in Pakistan should be thinking about ways that they can do so. But yet how sad it is to see the country's current trajectory with, an outflow of human capital following Imran Khan's deposal. And it's really relevant to hear you speak on this topic in the wake of what's happened in Bangladesh, where the student movement, at the cost of hundreds of lives, was able to oust a corrupt, long-standing leader, critically with a military that decided to be impartial and not intervene in what was happening. So I guess this is, I think my question really is like, it's very useful and important to think about ways that we can technically rebalance the budget, restructure the fiscal framework. But I think an important precondition to that is ridding the country of this layer of self-enriching military political alliance. Yeah.
So if by the way, I just want to comment. I guess that was more of a comment than a question. But all I want to say is, I'm not pessimistic. Right? If I were pessimistic, the first thing I should do is to actually leave politics, go back to making a reasonable amount of money, living an easy life, right? I'm actually just out to drop my daughter to university, and I'll be back, right, participating in the next set of protests that we have. I'm not pessimistic because I just guess this is part of our development journey. I just think that we get quicker to the actual destination that we want to get based on the critical mass of voices that demand the right sort of change. And I think it's important to be in that mix, because if the right people aren't there, then at some point what happens is, I think the anger within the country is going to trigger some form of change or the other anyway. But many of us who can influence it in a positive direction, right, will then not have the credibility and respect to be able to do so. And that's why I think what Imran Khan's doing in terms of simply standing up in jail, right, is important when we look at it through the lens of history. I think the feeling in the country was that Imran Khan would buckle in jail. I think the feeling in the country was that PTI as a party would crack after the severity of the crackdown. And the reason I'm optimistic is on the 8th of February, the people of Pakistan actually probed that that was wrong. Now, someone else might have done the sort of embarrassing magic that I showed you on my scene. But that shows that what worked in the past did not work this time. And I think that is because a new generation has different values and is not willing to just believe what they're told. Now, how quickly we get to that destination, I think the one challenge is, to an extent, these things have to be organic, right? And I think we have to absorb the pressure that comes our way. But I can genuinely tell you that this is not just a PTI fight or an Imran Khan fight. I think my generation and the generations after it, I'm 47, right? So let's say I'm still under 55, and I'd argue that between 40 and 60 is the prime of a person's professional life. But everyone under 40, we actually have to either talk about the sort of Pakistan we want and demand it, right? Or just be okay with what we've been seeing, which is what I think our parents' generation did. And if it's the latter, then Pakistan's not going to change as quickly as it can. But I don't think it's the latter. And I think proof is the way people have actually articulated their lack of confidence in the way Pakistan's being run, despite everything being thrown at them. And no better proof of that than, say, the bans on social media and Twitter and all of that, because you block criticism when you know you have no answer to it.
Just a quick addition to that question is, we have had, and especially in Bangladesh, the movement was basically sprung out of student unions. And I think in the past, we've had multiple opportunities to revive student unions in Pakistan. Even in 2017, Imran Khan even gave his verbal support to the idea of reviving. And you could argue that this change could actually be quicker if we had student unions up and running in the country. What's the blockade? We've got multiple governments after the ban. What's the blockade in unlocking and lifting the ban on student unions?
See, I think student unions have a checkered history in Pakistan. So I don't know what's the route that will take us there, right? Because I think when I started joining my undergrad degree in Pakistan, it was at the fag end of the time when, even after student unions had been blocked, when different groups would be able to push back and block and close down universities for weeks and months, and you ended up doing a 4-year degree in 6 or 7 years. I think the current block in Pakistan is actually the intensity of the crackdown, and the lack of credibility that politicians as a breed have had, because throughout the subcontinent in general, we've had a brand of politics which to an extent has really been about pomp and show rather than substance. You tend to give a good speech, right? And you tend to not always follow what you say with actions that are commensurate, right? And I think because of that, people have limited trust in political leadership. And I think the challenge for someone like Imran Khan, not just in building a political party, but also in terms of being able to transforming Pakistan's economy or governance maybe at the speed that I think he would like, actually is that in this culture of politics, we actually attract the wrong sort of people to politics, right? If you look at what happened on my seat, the lesson that I should get is I should be talking to the people who engineer these results, asking them what they want, and agreeing with their terms to be able to win my seat, right? That seems to be the price of wanting to be principled in politics. But if I get down that path, then I've lost my ability to independently be able to say what I want. And I think because this sort of political engineering in Pakistan has happened way too many times, we don't have the critical mass. Even with PTI, what you look at after the 9th of May when the crackdown began, a big chunk of the top leadership of the party was swept away. Many journalists and opinion makers asked me about the fact that PTI had crumbled. And I said, I think you'll find that the next layer doesn't. Because there's lots of younger aspirational people like me who've joined politics, who don't look at politics as a profession, and they'll stay the course. And that's what happened, right? But I think the number of interventions that we've made in our political system mean that it just hasn't matured enough to be able to push back and draw lines that it needs to do, to be able to evolve and push the country's governance and the country's economic system forward. And I do think in the end it is about the economy, right? But I do feel very, very strongly that it is going to be, I think empirically all of the subcontinent is a region that actually doesn't lend itself to authoritarian governments. We have had the three large countries in the subcontinent, the three large periods of military rule, but none of them have actually affected or been able to transform the country, right? And every military ruler has had to create a political scaffolding, whether it was Ayub Khan, whether it was Ziaul Haq, whether it was Musharraf, right? Has had to create a political scaffolding for their rule and political legitimacy for their rule within 2 or 3 years. I think the only similar episode you had in India was Indira Gandhi's emergency. And if I'm not wrong, she lost the election after that, right? With Bangladesh, you've again seen Hasina Wajid close all the doors to dissent and ultimately be pushed out. And so again, I feel that it's the critical mass of voices that demand a representative political system and that demand a fair free market economy that's going to transform Pakistan's economic future. We need both, and one is not going to happen without the other, because as much as we try, in 2024, no one's going to invest their money in a place where they feel there's a lot of political turbulence, and in a place where they feel that returns are more dependent on patronage than they are on your ability to competitively generate profit.
Hi, my name's Mariam. I was born and brought up in Islamabad and then have been living here for 11 years. So I'm undergrad, grad school at LBS, and currently work for Accenture. Also plan to move back end of the year. I think my question is a little like socioeconomic. So I think one of the big resources that we miss out is human capital. And you spoke earlier about how there's a lot of these government menial jobs that aren't necessary, need to be cut back. And I think it kind of ties into the illiteracy rate, which is quite high in Pakistan. But how would you kind of utilize this huge amount of human capital that's also doesn't necessarily have like particular skills that they could leverage and in the job market, and they're also post like schooling age. So even if we start to increase our literacy and like schooling at a younger age, we still have a large amount of adult population that is that doesn't have those skills to actually like contribute to the labor market in the same way. So how would you kind of bridge that gap of that medium space?
So I think great question. I think the first thing is that I don't believe that our human capital challenge is one that is linked to illiteracy. And that's because I think we have such a large population that the base literate population that we have is large enough to be able to produce large amounts of talent. And I think that's a failure of our job market, having spent the last 6 years looking at it. And again, if I give India as an example, again, I've never been to India, but having spent 16 years outside, you can't tell me that every Indian institution is like an IIT or an IIM, but because of the volume of people that live in India, right? 1.5 billion.
1.4 billion, yes.
You have a consultant on this.
Yeah.
So you have large chunks of the middle class, you have large chunks of an aspirational middle class, and I think you have a more developed private sector than you do in Pakistan. And that sort of sets the demand for talent. If you look at the Pakistani job market, we have a very small corporate sector. We have a very large a very large public sector. And then the private sector consists, as you said, of large numbers of semi-skilled, unskilled jobs that aren't very attractive. And I think even many jobs between the cusp of being blue collar or low wage, high collar, things like accountants and so on. If you look at an accountant in a bank versus an accountant in a government job, the guy working in government earns more to do nothing. But that, for me, in what I've observed, actually sets the baseline for the skill set that the guy working at the bank needs. The guy working at the bank only needs to be a little bit better to be employed by the bank. And he's still aspiring to go into a government job because that pays him more to do less, right? So you're not in this competitive environment. The cream of talent in Pakistan, or a very large chunk of it, ends up going abroad. And I think actually goes abroad in more traditional vocations than they do for some of our peer countries. Which is why I think if you look at MBAs, you don't get the proportion of Pakistani representation that you should. You get it in the medical field, you get it in the engineering field, you get it in few degrees, because those are the safe degrees that Pakistani talent takes, goes from that into the corporate sector abroad, where there's a where they get competitive opportunity to shine, right? But because that market within Pakistan is so small, you have a few companies. You have the Procter and Gamble's, you have the Unilevers, you have British American Tobacco, you have a McKinsey office since 2014-15. But I think you can count on, if not on 2 hands, you can count on 20 fingers the number of sort of sought after public sector institutions in which people would like to work. Because interestingly, in many places, the development sector pays more in Pakistan than the private sector does. P&G can take whoever they want, and because there's so few opportunities on the market, they know they will keep them for life, right? And so again, that sculpts their value proposition. For some of these firms that do work in Pakistan who want more talent, again, we need a bigger economy. We want the likes of P&G and Unilever and all of even these consumer good companies to be more excited than they are about a market of 250 million people. We've got to ask ourselves why that is not the case. And that actually tells you in a nutshell how investable the Pakistani economy is or isn't. Once we've cracked that problem, right, and the companies that operate in Pakistan want more Pakistanis simply because they have more business, our economies will start to change. I don't think this is a literacy problem. So that's a bit of a long explanation, but goes back to the fact that we need a competitive economy. Just want to add one other part. I think that it is indeed a complex challenge of what we do with the unskilled or the semi-skilled population. I actually think the unskilled in the private sector are not the problem in the sense that they make their space in the job market. Whether he's working in the agricultural field, whether he's working at a mechanic shop, right? I think one challenge is to get more women in the workplace because the participation rate of women is exceptionally low. And I think the other challenge is trying to retrain the 8 or 9 out of 10 public sector employees who don't work. I don't know what we do with them. We make traffic policemen out of them. Traffic is a major issue. We, I don't know, train them to be parking attendants, whatever. But it's better than him opening and closing the door of my office. When I go in, I can do that. I've got 2 hands, right? Once we start to do that, we start to focus, change the focus on productivity. And I think what happens in the public sector will start to change standards in the private sector as well. Sorry.
For this, I don't think it's an issue of optimization, but maybe an issue of culture. And how do you tackle that? Because India has a very strong private sector as of right now. However, within the government of India, where I've worked, you will have, if you not just don't go to the minister, go to the bureaucrat. He will have 5 men. Will be 1 chai, 1 coffee, 1 door, and 1 the curtains at least. And it's an issue of culture. So, like, how
It comes from the way the Brits left us. Yeah, and I'm sure it sounds nice to the guy enjoying it. So they like having 1 person for the curtains and 1. It's true, it is the culture, but I think 75 years, 77 years is enough to change it, right? And enough for ordinary people to want to change it. And it's interesting that what triggered the protests in Bangladesh were part of that same culture in the sense of the entitlement of a certain group of employees to public sector jobs, which when you step back and think about it, makes no sense. A public sector job that is funded with taxpayer money has to be equal opportunity for everyone. And so we need to be able to crack open that culture. And it's indeed true that pre-partition, because the private sector and what is now India was more developed, there's a leg up. I think Pakistan has its success stories as well. But we're now at a stage where I feel that we as Pakistanis need to demand, commensurate to the talent that we have in a country of 250 million people, an economy that can actually provide opportunities to actually a hell of a lot of talent that exists. So,
Minister, thank you so much for the insightful presentation. My name is Aktul Baloğlu. I'm an LBS alumni as well. And my question, I'm originally from Turkey, Istanbul, so we love Pakistan and Turkey. For history.
we love Turkey, yes.
Yes, I know. It's mutual. So, I mean, we had very similar experiences in the elections. So, for the last 20 years, elections have been manipulated by Erdogan regime in Turkey. So, about 10 million people, mostly white collar, they had to leave the country, including myself and my friends, my family. And it's like my 3rd graduate degree here after Georgetown University and Columbia, and I've been working abroad. So, I mean, there is the interference of the religion in Turkey, in Pakistan, in, you know, Iran, and in different contexts in those countries for the last more than 40 years, I would say. And, you know, Turkey by Atatürk was founded as a secular democracy. And we did a lot on this. It still, you know, has a lot of progress. And then back to 19th, Pakistan and Turkey both have economies that they might be not successful, but woman prime minister, one from Oxford and the other one from Yale. And then the situation is no longer the same. Like, you know, those people created an environment where anything Western is bad. And, you know, there is this, you know, a clash of the civilization, that kind of stuff. So you cannot win against them because, you know, then the religion is always prioritized by those people. That's how they got the votes. And then a lot of people gave up. Even, you know, like I will give you an example. In Turkey, they lost the last election. They probably manipulated, but I mean, not so much that, but people even the opposition won, they're no longer motivated to change the stuff anymore. So I mean, how do you see this, since the enlightenment process in the world of the democracy, the Western values, because at some point these were a little bit imported from the West, and which is fine. And the secular values are important for all these countries.
So I get your question, and I mean, the way I'll answer it, it's a sensitive topic, but I think if you look at politics the world over, it's swinging towards extremes.
Yeah.
Right? So you have the ultra-right that is coming to the fore in many countries in Europe. You just had days of protests against immigrants in the UK. You have religion as a factor in many countries. In some places, you then get a swing from right to left. I don't think that any of these political or governance systems are in equilibrium. And I think that to be able to get them to a decent place, I think it is both important. Number one, for countries within to look at the impact of their actions. So you could argue, for example, that the waves of sort of Islamism in Turkey, I don't want to get into that debate, but you could argue that to an extent it's perhaps a result of bending too much towards a secular framework, right? That perhaps wasn't in sync with a lot of the population. And similarly, you could argue that you have a bit of a counter reaction to that right now. I think you could similarly argue, right, that in places that what happened in Bangladesh, for example, is a reaction to almost every door, right, to people being able to express dissent or being able to articulate their will being closed. And I think so to an extent, it is the responsibility, if you look at in countries like this, in countries like Pakistan, where 2 years of trying to step by step suppress Imran Khan's popularity, put him in jail, nothing worked in terms of changing the election results, right? That we need to be able to look at reality in the face. You could also argue that it is, to an extent, the responsibility of the international community to also try and push fundamental values, right? I certainly felt that to an extent, the international community, as far as elections in Pakistan were concerned, was to an extent happy to look the other way, assuming that everything would become normal. And I think they now recognize that it hasn't, and that the elections were rigged in an embarrassing way, bringing no stability to Pakistan, right? And the interest that the world has in Pakistan's stability is because we're on the border with Afghanistan in perhaps the most turbulent region, or one of the most turbulent regions in the world. And so I think it's I think both the countries themselves, and if you like, the global diaspora, have a responsibility, because when we shirk that responsibility, countries go to extremes and they go from one extreme to another. That's the way that
We'll take 2 more questions. So, okay.
Hi, my name is Murtaza. And thank you a lot for your time today. You gave a very comprehensive overview of the sort of rigging that we saw in these elections, the like of which we've seen before.
we haven't seen. I don't think we've seen.
I think that's up for debate, but that's not the question. The question is, we saw that, despite what was done, Imran Khan won the elections.
Yeah.
We agreed on that.
Yeah.
Right. He was perhaps, he is the most popular politician in the country right now. You saw people that jumped ship, fought from other parties, lost. You saw people that were not known, but were supported by Imran Khan win elections, right? So he's very much the center of gravity in this party. But he's also 71, right? And you've seen the sort of criticism that he's had against other parties where the succession is very, familial. It's patronage. So what is, and I hope he lives a long, healthy life, but what is the plan after Imran Khan for a party where there is so much concentration of, power, and also in a party that has had troubles recently with elections within its own structure. So what is the plan after Imran Khan? Or is this party that's just there for as long as Imran Khan is there?
Look, I think it's a very fair question, and I'm going to answer it honestly from my personal perspective, right? Rather than give you a party answer. Okay? I think it's a fair question because it's true that in a way the party is not like a political party of the likes that you have in the West, right? There's a reason for that. And we've seen that reason over the last 2 years, right? When you suppress political forces in the way that PTI has been suppressed, it happened to us for the first time. I would say the election rigging is unique because never has such a rigging trail been left behind. I mean, I can prove this with evidence, right? Everyone else has to tell a story. And I can prove it with evidence on hundreds of seats. And I can prove it with evidence on seats that we've won, where our margins have been reduced. And because the results weren't changed, the returning officers haven't even bothered to change the results of the individual polling stations where they fudged the results, okay? I don't think our system will mature and parties will become institutions in the way that we want them to be until we let the political system mature. It can't happen. People are not going to trust me. People are not going to trust any of my colleagues. They're going to trust Imran Khan because Imran Khan is a hero. The party is not going to become an organization where people actually trust that organization, and that organization stands for a specific set of values in the way that we've seen in the West, because we keep on destroying the little progress that happens in our political system with some new savior or the other thinking he or she has the answers to Pakistan wars. And then 5 years later, 10 years later, again, we're back to ground zero because he or she didn't have the answers to Pakistan wars, right? So if you actually look at if you look at the three major parties, the PTI, Pakistan's People's Party, and PMLN, I don't think you can actually differentiate them on traditional left and right ideology. I think you can differentiate them on status quo and anti-status quo, in the sense that the leadership of the People's Party and the PMLN have been in power for the last 50 years, right? And Imran Khan entered politics on the premise of breaking that. And I think over the last 2 or 3 years, it's been closer to breaking that than ever before, right? But if you want this to evolve to left and right, then we have to allow politics to mature. Of these three parties, the party that is perhaps most associated with ideology is the Pakistan People's Party, supposedly seen as a left of center liberal party. But they're supporting military trials right now. They're supporting, Bilawal just gave a speech today in Parliament or yesterday, right, saying the judges are favoring PTI for giving PTI's reserved seats to PTI, right? If you're going to be so bendable, then don't talk to me about ideology, right? And because Imran Khan stands for the anti-status quo, I think what is true in PTI is two things. One, you have a much larger proportion of middle-class student leaders, ground-up politicians, certainly true in KP, and since the last 2-3 years also been true in Punjab, of people who've actually entered politics through the party and come from a very different background to mine. But they represent the sort of idealism in politics that you like. They're sometimes a little bit over exuberant, but that contribution comes from Imran, number one. And number two represents the set of people, I think like me, who've chosen to enter politics, who have a family background in politics. My paternal grandfather was a senior figure in the politics of KP. my maternal grandfather was the president of Pakistan after General Zia, Ghulam Isar Khan. But when I came into politics, I decided to come off my own set of achievements to try and move Pakistan forward. I don't use my family's name to win votes, right? I try and contribute through what I'm doing and try to be both a technocrat and a politician at the same time. But if we want that to translate to institutions, then everyone in Pakistan has to allow politics to mature. Because what happened around me on the 8th of February was a message being given to every politician that you're only acceptable if you're up for sale. And obviously, if you are willing to pay for politicians and want to buy politicians who are willing to sell their values, whether they agree with you or not, you will get people who are willing to sell themselves. And that doesn't result in political parties being made. That journey we have to traverse, and that journey you guys have to voice and vote for through your actions.
Sorry, hi, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammed. I am also from Karachi, but currently living and working in London. Two quick questions with a bit of pretext. One of them is an extension of that question. So you said that, Pakistan is confused in the sense, are we an open economy or are we, if you want to be a socialist state? I fail to see how do you think, PTI is the answer to that, because I fail to see PTI as an ideological party at all. Sure, PMLN, PPP, as much as I loathe them, I do think have an ideology, even if it's on paper, which is Roti Kapda aur Makan, which for those who might not know, translates to bread, shelter, and clothing. But it's still unorganized, it's still an ideology.
The title of an Indian movie.
But my point is that, God save Imran Khan, or Imran Khan is our hero, is not an ideology, sadly. That is, at the lack of a better word, like a cult. So I fail to see how that ideology is going to get us out of where we are right now. And if we were to move forward, we need a party with an ideology. And I personally don't think that Imran Khan or PTI is going to be the answer to that. That is the first part of it. And because you were talking about also how Imran Khan had talked about he wants to get rid of dynastical politics, or which is what was one of his visions. Putting Shah Mahmood Qureshi as your foreign minister is not an answer to that. That is, we know he's a seasoned politician, he has a dynasty of his own. And at the same time, PTI also came into power in 2018 with the help of many electables. Electables who have used our current system of politics to kind of always, I would say, trade Pakistani voters and humiliate them to kind of come into power and support whoever the brokers of power are at that time. So PTI has also used that same setup to come into power. So I don't see moving forward, how can I put my trust back into that same political party? That is the first question as to how PTI is the answer to that. And the second is, again, something you've briefly touched upon. The topic of today was about stolen mandates. And as much as I might disagree with Imran Khan and PTI, I wholeheartedly agree that the 2024 elections was stolen from them completely. They 100%, it is the leading party. It is supposed to, and the people of Pakistan were essentially ridiculed because they had elected and given him the mandate, and he's supposed to be the one who's in power. But I don't think the way that PTI came into power in 2018 was entirely where the people of Pakistan were honored their entire vote as well. I think a lot of it was a stolen mandate from other political parties leading up to it. The elections may not have been as blatantly rigged as they were this time around, but we were on ground at that time in 2018 doing elections. And in NA 247, where the future president of Pakistan was being elected, Dr. Arif Alvi, polling stations were closed in the middle of the day. We found our polling agents were, turned out by residing officers saying they're not going to sign the forms. Ballot papers were found in Gizri, which were, after the day of elections, which had stamps of the opposing party. So this stuff that did happen, and there was a lot more systemic inequality in terms of fair play leading up to the elections, which European monitors had also commented on, such as crackdowns on Dawn, Geo, or even the formation of TLP, because TLP's entire vote bank, 46% of them had voted for PMLN in the previous elections, and these 15 to 20 seats, which they were able to break apart, they didn't really win anything, but which their voters were able to break apart, they were the ones which formed.
So one PTI is the answer to 2018. Should we take one
more.
One or two other
And
questions?
sorry, I just want to add one thing to the same question is, and just so that you can cover it in the same question. I think we in Pakistan, politics is very like history just repeats itself, right? Maryam Nawaz loses power, she starts blaming General Asim Bajwa as Papa Jones and blah blah blah. She comes into power, stops talking about the military establishment. PTI is in power, they're silent. General Bajwa's extension is approved in miraculous time, blah blah blah. They come into power, they lose power, we're suddenly hitting at the establishment. As a Pakistani voter, when can we trust the a political party that they're going to continue their journey of civilian supremacy?
Let's take the 2 or 3 questions come. I'd love to hear people and then I'll just take. So
Go
from
on.
the back,
Everyone just speak up so we can wrap up. We'll wrap up at 6 sharp because that's when this room has to be in.
So my name is Nahil. I'm actually an undergraduate studying in Pakistan right now. And what I want to ask is, what can people like me do to cause a change in Pakistan?
just be the best that you can be and you'll find your space in Pakistan. You don't need to go back. Sorry, you are studying in
Yeah, I'm
Pakistan.
studying in Pakistan right now.
Yeah. Follow your passion and you will find something. Seriously, never do what bores you, and I think you'll find your best way of returning to the country. The lady at the back, and then 2, and then 3, and then I'll take this critical question.
Zara, go on.
My name is Zara. I'm from Iran. I'm studying MBA here, and your talk was really inspirational for me, coming from a country that has big trouble. So for me, the question is that the concept of critical mass is so true. You need to have that critical mass of those who really want to take action. But having this political system that is not working, how this critical mass can be built? How could they, like, practically, what are your advice for those who are living in the country, those who are living abroad? How can they help to build this critical mass?
Okay, 2 more and then, yeah.
My name is Omar. I just wanted more of a personal question. So you wanted to contribute to Pakistan and then you moved back. You moved into politics. So my question is, what other avenues? So for example, did you explore maybe going into NGOs or perhaps more special advisor positions? Because, for example, right now you are not in power.
No, got the question. Right now I'm doing a little bit of consulting on the side. You don't need to go into politics. You can do whatever you want. For me, that was what I wanted to do. I think that's where you can build the most direct change. But you can go and open a business in Pakistan, and that can be, I mean, I think, for example, you can't say that I've done more than an ex-McKinsey colleague, Mudassar Sheikha, who founded Careem, which is now one of the few Pakistani unicorn stories across the Middle East. Again, it's about following your passion, in my view. I'm just taking the short questions in the middle so that we...
My name is Nafil. I'm from Pakistan, but I've been working here for the last 5 years in the insurance sector. My question was a little bit specific. Considering you're the finance minister, I wanted to ask about the insurance sector in Pakistan and how, because considering right now it's not very developed, and how much of a hindrance do you think that is, the fact that we don't have a developed insurance, capital markets, or banking sector, and how do you think we can develop that to boost our economy going forward into the future?
And last question from Divya.
Hi, I'm Divya. I'm an MBA 25 at LBS. I just have a quick question. I think from the Indian experience I have, and I used to work with state governments in India, I've experienced that even with times of political instability, whether it is a national government election or a state government election, there are certain institutions that are built within the government, which is your not just the federal system, but your village level systems and institutions with regulators that are built in that help support the economy and ensure that things go per usual and day on day, and things on the ground are not as disturbed. Could you talk a little bit about how Pakistan can continue to preserve those institutions while instability at the top continues to disrupt day-to-day life?
Okay, so you've had some great
Sorry.
questions.
Hi, I'm Ikra. Thank you so much. My question is on a slightly different theme to the others. I have clinical background and have worked in Karachi in the health sector, so quite familiar with the challenges that we face on the ground. And we do have a lot of healthcare challenges, sadly. You already touched on this a bit earlier, but what do you think are some of the immediate and the time-sensitive health policy challenges, especially when it comes to the health sector, which need to be addressed in an effective manner with sound policies? And what are the blockers for those effective
Cool.
policies?
Okay.
Thank you.
We have a bunch of questions. Let me try and address everything quickly. 6
Yeah.
o'clock, hard stop.
We can go out and continue.
Yeah,
We
and
can
then
go
we
out.
can go out and talk
Yeah.
about this. Look, your questions were maybe the most controversial in terms of challenging my position, right, or my point of view. I've not asked you, and I think anyone who asks you to say and take PTI or any one party as the panacea for Pakistan is obviously wrong. Okay? Every party is flawed, in particular in a political system that is more flawed than most. We've had 30 plus years of military rule. So we've had massive interruptions in our political development that our neighbors to the east haven't. I think that what is true though is that it seems that we hold Imran Khan to a different standard than we seem to do some of the more traditional politicians. And actually, it's neither your view nor my view that counts so much as the view of the people. Right? And I think what is true is that the majority of the people of Pakistan see Imran Khan as representing a hope, right, to break the cycle of the status quo. Otherwise, they would not have voted for him. Despite 2 years of repression and branding to try and brand the party as somehow being against the interests of the state, right? The things that I find paradoxical are, right, people will typically raise so-and-so politician in Pakistan. For example, we talked of Shah Mahmood Qureshi coming from a political background. It's okay to come from a political background, right? We don't look at the very fundamental contradictions that the other politicians or political party heads or political organizations have. Nawaz Sharif's on his, along with his brother, on his 5th cycle as Prime Minister. Benazir's been Prime Minister twice, followed by Zardari as President twice. Right? These are all people that have been branded as anti-state at different times and who have vowed to fight for democracy. Now, if the 5th time around, they're able to lie on the floor as flat as a pancake, then I don't know about Imran Khan, but these people certainly aren't the answer. Right? That's the first thing. And I think within PTI, in particular after the last year, where you have many of us going through some form of baptism by fire. It's not easy not to see your family for 10, 11 months. It's not easy to be going to court every week to face murder and terrorism charges, knowing you've done nothing wrong, right? None of this is easy. But many of us now feel that we own the party in a different way. Even traditionally, what was true in PTI was you had a lot more pushback and a lot more debate within the party than you had in other parties because of the fact that it's a flatter organization and doesn't have a familial hierarchical structure. So we may not have created the organization that ideally we would like, but it is the only alternative in the mainstream to party-led organizations. I mean, if you look at the PMLN, even right now in the 5th time, you're telling me there's no one outside the core family to be Chief Minister of Punjab, to be Prime Minister, to be Deputy Prime Minister, right? What's left? So, as I said, it's now for us to shape PTI as a sort of organization that serves the needs of Pakistan as a progressive party that is more institutional than these. And of course, Imran Khan's going to have a following. He was a hero, not just to millions of Pakistanis, but to millions across the world before he ever started politics. He built 3 cancer hospitals. He built a university, right? So he has a credibility and respect outside of politics. And that credibility and respect doesn't go away. Now, what have I missed? I've missed a bit on institutional strengthening. I think that is Pakistan's challenge. I think what is interesting is that at the base, you talked of the bureaucracy in India. I'm very sure they're very, very alike. I'm sure that the levels of corruption are very, very alike. I think the slight difference between Pakistan and India in terms of their political journeys is that I think because India relied on a pre-partition political process that was stronger, it continued and evolved. And we've had these interruptions of military rule. But that doesn't mean that institutions in Pakistan aren't in some way that they don't have an intrinsic strength. You still have the courts fighting back. You had a political party like ours. I mean, whether in India or in Bangladesh, a party has to face the sort of crackdown that we faced in the last year for anyone to actually know whether it comes out the other side. And not only did PTI come out the other side, it came out the other side with stronger support from the people of Pakistan. And I think that shows an institutional strength in people's belief in democracy that many of us somehow need to sustain. Because I think the one thing, even though we're going through a complex phase in our history, and I would argue that India is similarly going through a complex phase in your history, I don't think India's institutional strength or the strength of its secular democratic institutions has ever been more challenged from our point of view in Pakistan than it has in the last 5 or 10 years when you hear the stories that we hear. Because you have, from a secular party, shifted to a Hindu right party, right, ruling the country for over 10 years. And similar to Pakistan, India is also a conservative culture with strong anchorings in religion, right? And so I think these course corrections of ours need to happen. Our challenge goes back to needing to unleash the economic strength. Because we can't say that if Bangladesh today, despite the political turbulence, has unleashed a certain political, economic strength, right, and economic potential that we in Pakistan have yet to unleash, that with 250 million people, that we can't. It's ridiculous. But what is true, if we look at case study after case study, it is the strength of institutions that actually does, if you like, push back. And if at the moment, if the reason Pakistan has never been a successful autocracy is that there's enough residual strength in our institutions, we inherit the same ones in our justice system, in our bureaucracy, in our political system, that they push back against autocracy. To your question, ma'am, on this critical mass, I think it's organic. I think it's hard to give a formula for it. And I think it's really about courage. And that's just an answer from history. There have to be enough mad people, right, to challenge the course of history. There have to be enough bold and brave enough people. And I can certainly tell you that many of us working with Imran Khan draw inspiration from Imran Khan, because in the midst of the post-May 9th crackdown, and I've met him twice in jail, and whether you like him or not, the man's resolve and the man's steadfastness is incredible to see. It gives many of us working with him, who are much smaller politicians, the strength to carry on, right? As a public figure, I want to be careful about what I say about both Iran and Turkey, because we enjoy good relations with both. But I think it is actually, I think that critical mass comes at whatever point you get the scales tipped too much to one side of an imbalanced political system, you get pushback. You've got it a couple of times in Iran. You just saw it in Bangladesh. You even saw it in the Indian elections, in my opinion, where I think you had a bit of a resurgence of the Congress because maybe India was veering too much to the right. And it seems ludicrous to us that a country with 200 million Muslims would not want to factor in that huge minority as a part of its national fabric, right? But every country faces these problems, and somehow we need to find our own solutions. And I think one of the messages from a place like this is that even from a bastion of corporate learning like LBS, I think when the time is right, we can actually go back and contribute to our countries. Thank you very much, and I look forward to engaging with some of you outside.